Tachiko with the OCAT TA team. I'm joined by my colleagues Patrick Hyman and Nicole Paxton. Today we'll be hearing from two speakers on a topic I know is of great importance to the OCAT community. Dr. Lisa Grossman of BCBSMR Performance Consulting and my colleague Robin Senezel will present on secondary trauma and compassion fatigue in social services. This is a topic we first discussed back in May of 2016. Lisa and Robin will build off the knowledge from that first webinar and give you some new ways to think about and act on secondary trauma and self-care. Dr. Lisa Grossman is the president of SMR Performance Consulting, LLC, where she works with combat veterans, wounded warriors, military and law enforcement personnel, healthcare providers, corporate executives, and professional athletes around self-awareness, self-regulation, and other aspects of performance psychology. Robin Senezel is the project director for the National Resource Center for Healthy Marriage and Families, a federally funded initiative that promotes the integration of healthy relationship skills into social service delivery systems as part of a holistic approach to strengthening families. She's spent 10 years of federal level work in the family strengthening, healthy marriage, and responsible fatherhood fields. She also has over 20 years of local government experience specializing in strategic public-private partnerships to mitigate community distress, including broad expertise with family strengthening, child welfare, workforce development, violence prevention, offender reentry, and poverty reduction. She is a certified family life educator. We have a lot of great information to share with you today, but we also want to hear from you about your thoughts, strategies, and challenges with stress and secondary trauma. Please don't be shy with sharing your knowledge and questions. Throughout this webinar, we will have polling questions that we want to get your feedback, and also feel free to type in your questions in the question box. And that's some screenshots to show you how to do that. But please submit your questions into the little question pod, and we'll be looking at questions and answering them. Today's webinar, including the slide deck and all of the materials, will be on the Learning Center, and we'll show you at the end how to get to that. And with that, I will now turn it over to Lisa.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending today's webinar. I'm going to start off briefly with a poll question, and the first question I want to ask everybody is, did you attend the secondary trauma webinar? You can take a moment and respond to the right of your screen in the box there that's provided with yes or no. All right, thanks so much. And I'm going to go ahead and move on. Oh, I'm sorry. Next is another poll question. How do you currently manage secondary stress? So please type your answer in the chat box there on the right-hand side. All right, thank you all. All right, so just to give you a little bit of brief background about me and why I'm talking to you all about compassion fatigue. This is a webinar, and it's a piggyback to the first one that you all were provided a while back. I'm going to give you some tools this time so that you can immediately take away some techniques and things to just be more aware of in order to start just enhancing your overall awareness and also your ability to self-regulate your stress, as that is a huge contributing factor to a build-up over time and leave you more susceptible to compassion fatigue. The reason I'm speaking about this is because of my own personal experience. I spent a number of years working with wounded veterans in a track program that was provided through Wounded Warrior Project. And although I teach this, I have fallen, to the compassion fatigue nasty thing in itself, and I'm sure many people have. So that's why I put that little funny picture there. That's what I look like at the beginning of the track program, and that's what I look like at the end with the horse head. So, everyone can relate to this, anybody in the field of social services and working with others. And so it's really important to focus in on yourself because you can't take care of others unless you yourself first. So, you know, with the build-up and also the amount of hours and time that you spend a week in these one-on-one sessions with these folks, it's just natural to have these problems build. So the key things that I'm going to focus in on today is just growing your ability to be more self-aware and catch some things prior to, and also just put some things in place for preventative measures. We talk about building the immune system to keep you from getting sick. Well, I'm going to talk about building your stress immune system so that you have a better ability to try to fight off these stressors over time so they don't build up and accumulate into compassion fatigue and deal with the symptoms related to that. So just to briefly recap here what secondary trauma is, it's an emotional distress resulting from first-hand accounts or experiences of trauma by others, which is something that everybody on this call has experienced where clients and folks that you're working with are going to tell you some very in-depth, very graphic, very detailed circumstances that they may have experienced. So it can affect you by reliving those things through with them and their experiences, but also it may trigger something within yourself of something that you have experienced at no fault of yours, but it's just natural and human, so you're going to have that type of reaction. Signs and symptoms of PTSD are present and caused by indirect exposure, and this is where people experience difficulty sleeping, inability to attend or focus, your concentration is affected, your memory is affected, you misplace things. I use this story many times when I talk to folks about compassion fatigue where, and I put myself out there and over time of these stressors that really does start to take a toll on ourselves mentally and emotionally. The impact here is increased arousal or activation, more of a hypervigilant state, which you all know is a big symptom with PTSD, changes in cognitive function like I just related to there, and just an overall loss of coping mechanisms. You know, we teach these things and we help others with these things, but we're usually the last to put these things in place for ourselves, and that's why it's really important that we focus in on this today. So a lot of the time secondary trauma is used interchangeably with compassion fatigue, and I use those terms interchangeably quite a bit because they're very, very similar and very synonymous in their explanation and their definition. But I really focus in on what is the cause of secondary trauma, or what is the cause of the buildup of compassion fatigue, and it is just a repetitive trauma, just like an overuse injury to soft tissue. It's an overuse injury, so to speak, of just continuous stressors building up and your inability to capture that balance. So I ask you to take a moment here and look at this second point. Take a look at yourself from the outside looking in and look at some of these key factors of what I listed here: avoidance, chronic exhaustion, hypervigilance, withdrawal, illnesses, fear, anger, inability to sleep, which is a big one. But I ask everyone just take a moment and look at these and see if any of these things ring true to you, something that you may have experienced at one time or another. And there might be many, many others that should be on this list that are not. So anything within this wheelhouse, just to kind of get the pot stirring here for you all. Okay. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to pass over to Robin, and she's going to provide you another poll question and talk about some other things related to the OCAT tool.
Thanks, Lisa. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you could join us this afternoon. We're excited to talk about this topic. And so my poll question is, have you participated in motivational interview training? Yes or no? Okay, great. So motivational interviewing, for those of you who are familiar with it and have participated, which would be the majority of you, we're just going to kind of quick recap on what it is. Motivational interviewing is really just a technique that's been utilized in various clinical settings to aid clients in the process of change. It's a technique of communication, and it really is about building a partnership with the client to help gain and understand the information about themselves and their environment, and then be willing to identify and work to change life circumstances. So it's really about developing a partnership. Well, we're going to talk about the opportunities that you have whenever you're using the online CalWORKS appraisal tool opportunities for folks to provide disclosure of trauma and distress. When you're using the tool, as you all know, it's an assessment and a data management tool. But the key to it is the comprehensive interview. That's critical to ensuring an effective assessment. And whenever you're getting ready to use the tool with a client, as you all know, it really is about beginning the conversation before you start the tool, about building that rapport with the client and going with the flow. It's not about using the tool in a rigid format like we have to ask this question and then this question in sequence. It's about being comfortable enough with the tool so that you can move around in the different segments of the tool as the client starts to talk about certain things. So if, for example, you're in the section on child care and they start talking about housing, you can scoot over to the housing section and fill that in. You don't have to go, oh, no, wait, we're not in that section yet. It's also important to remember to mix in open-ended questions, because open-ended questions help people start to talk more. Yes or no questions are not very helpful in a conversational setting. Note observations. If you're noticing they're saying one thing but their body language is saying something else, be sure to make notes about that. Whether you make those notes in the computer, in the note box, or if you just make notes on paper and then put those in the computer later, is up to you. But the most important piece is to try to balance the conversation with use of the computer, and sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge. So when we talk about motivational interviewing as we're using the OCAT tool, what we're really saying is a very active and engaging practice that requires skill, more importantly requires certain techniques that are meant to improve your client's ability to think about their role and their level of self-efficacy. It's a very person-centered approach. It's really about helping the people to feel empowered to make changes and to explore their own ambivalence and the principal obstacle to overcome change. So it's key to be collaborative, think about the relationship as a partnership, be evocative, build trust, and help build, empower the client by focusing on their pre-existing strengths. As I mentioned before, it's really about open-ended questions, it's about affirmations, and it includes reflective listening, recapping and summarizing what the client is saying to you to make sure that you're actually hearing what they're trying to say, and it supports self-efficacy. Whenever we talk about strengths-based approach, which is the key to using the assessment tool, it's about case management, very participatory activity, and it relies heavily on a strong relationship between the client and the caseworker. It really is a partnership. And it's encouraging innovative thinking and helps you learn a lot more about your client than you may already know. It empowers your client, and building that relationship and empowerment with your client encourages the client to want to be honest with you. You can't help them effectively develop a case plan if you don't actually know what's really going on in their lives. So you have to find a way that helps them feel engaged and allows them to set their own goals that are aligned with their own specific needs and their requirements and their abilities, not just a list of to-do things that you think they might need to do. And when the client recognizes their challenges and their issues and their own barriers, they're much more likely to deal with them, to want to deal with them directly than if we're the ones who are pointing out challenges. Likewise, client strengths are identified and brought to the forefront. They're much more likely to have a spirit of self-empowerment and increase their level of self-efficacy. They feel more motivated to do stuff because they feel that they have the capacity to actually do what they need to. So instead of focusing on challenges that our clients have, we have to shift the focus to one that really emphasizes what they can do and develops a more positive relationship between you and the client so that the two of you are building this partnership to focus on achieving the goals that have been identified by the client. And it's not about ignoring the challenges, but it really is about being strength-based and focusing on what they can do, not what they can't do. So that brings us to the conversation of empathy versus sympathy. And we've heard these terms, but they're often confused. Sympathy is caring and concern for the suffering of an individual, whereas empathy is the ability to understand their perspective and experience their feelings. It's kind of like walking in their shoes, so to speak. Both of these come from a place of compassion, and therefore they seem similar, but to the receiver they can feel very, very different. Sympathy says, I feel sorry for you. Empathy says, I understand how you feel. So there's a really big difference. Sympathy can feel like pity or come across as a pre-programmed response that really comes across as insincere, leaving the receiver feeling inferior or disempowered, and that's not the goal. That does not build rapport with the client. Empathic responses also help establish a human connection and build that rapport. So let's take a look at some of the specific sections on the tool where individuals might disclose traumatic or distressing situations. And as we look at each of these sections, what I want you to do is to think about how you use strengths-based and empathic responses to help motivate the families that you're working with. So the first slide we're going to look at is housing safety and stability. And one of the things to keep in mind when you're talking to clients about housing is that stability really is a relative term. Somebody may be sleeping on the sofa of a friend or a family member, and for them that may feel completely stable, whereas based on your own experiences, that may not seem stable. So it's important to ask all these questions, but not from a judgmental perspective, and especially when we consider that some of the families we're serving have lots of other barriers, and they're concerned about how the office is going to respond to some of those barriers. So thinking about housing as stability being a relative term is important. Now let's talk about mental health, mind over matter. Mental health is another area that can be very concerning, and a lot of things can come up whenever someone is talking about their emotional and mental health or the mental health of those in their family and things that might be going on within their home. And especially many of the families that we're working with are very stressed. They've got lots of things going on, and it can be very difficult for them to manage their emotions sometimes. So coming from a strengths-based approach, one might ask a question like this: with everything you have going on, how are you managing to do so well? That creates an environment where you, first of all, you've acknowledged that they are doing it as well as they are, given all of the circumstances that they've been talking to you about. So you're giving them that acknowledgement, and you're opening the conversation so they can talk to you about what perhaps they're doing as it relates to self-care themselves. So it's an important way to start that conversation. Substance abuse is another area. Substance use or misuse. When you look at the questions, some of these questions come across kind of from an accusatory kind of perspective. You know, how often, when you're asking someone about using drugs or drinking, how often do you? And, you know, some of these responses, if you're asking someone how many drinks containing alcohol do you have in a typical day, and they say 10 or more, you know, this is one of those places where you kind of have to keep a poker face. You really don't want to come across reacting to the client's response. For them, 10 or more a day may be actually cutting back. You just don't know. So you want to come across from a very sensitive and not judgmental place, because if you come across as judgmental, they're not going to give you the answers that you need. And they may have been dealing with all kinds of trauma or stress that may have led them to misusing substances as a coping mechanism. So it's important that you understand that so that you can then get back to what are appropriate referrals to help them violence. And that's why there's a series of questions here to help get at, are there abusive behaviors going on in the home? And abusive behavior can be normalized. If this is the way that you have always been talked to, where there's yelling and screaming and negative comments, it can become normalized. So when people are responding to some of these questions, they may not even realize that some of this is emotional or verbal abuse. And another important point is to realize that it isn't necessarily just couple violence. It could be elder abuse that's going on in the home, or it could be teenagers who are fighting back with their parents. There are cases that show up in the news often where you've got a teen son or daughter who has become violent towards their parents for various reasons. So it's important to not just focus on the couple, but to be very open and keep the questions open so that you can get to any of the other issues that might be going on. Which brings us to healthy relationships. All relationships can improve. Everyone can use a little bit of an improvement in their relationship. And so it's important to establish what's going on in the relationship. Is it a healthy relationship? And would they be interested in any resources? We have some resources later in the slides that you can certainly take advantage of and share with the families that you serve around healthy relationship education. But it's important to think in the context of every good relationship could be a little bit better. And that goes for your relationships too. As we're going to hear Lisa talk more about self-care, keep in mind social service providers have families too. And if your relationships at home are stressing, then you're bringing that to work. So now what? So now we've gone through this assessment, and it's time for us to talk to our clients about what's next. We need to acknowledge the client's strengths, and we need to offer encouragement. We need to use the information gathered to determine appropriate referrals. Know what the resources are that are available in your community or online that might be helpful to your clients. Not all clients have access or transportation to get to some of the services they might need, so there might be some online resources that would be helpful too. And one of the challenges with empathy is that when we really put ourselves out there, when we really put ourselves in the shoes of others who are in duress and dealing with stress over and over and over, when we keep doing this, it can really wear on us and cause compassion fatigue. Self-care is critical for you, your family, and the clients you serve. As I mentioned, I've included a few resources at the end of this presentation that might be helpful to you. And now I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Dr. Grossman to talk more about self-care.
All right, folks, so I'm back here, and here's where we're going to get into the guts and the meat of this webinar, and giving you some quick and immediate tools and techniques that you can take with you now moving forward, excuse me, and start implementing them in your everyday life so that you can better serve the people that you're taking care of. We mentioned the left off on self-care, and that's what this is all about. So when we talk about secondary trauma, I thought I'd focus on what the big culprit is, and I alluded to this earlier, but the big key here is stress. And I have a range of pictures up on the screen. Some of them may look familiar to you. You may feel that you've experienced some of them. The question I get asked a lot is why you have somebody up there that looks like he's going on vacation, and that's because vacation is a stressor. Positive things are stressors, as well as negative things, as we all know. But what is stress overall? So I'd like to start this off by just explaining what stress is, the definition of stress, because there is a big misconception of that. But it's a non-specific response to a demanding or a threatening event, whether it's actual or perceived. So you're going to have these stressors that compile and pile and pile, and you don't have the ability to balance those stressors with coping resources or coping mechanisms. Related chronic stress, if not managed, will over a period of time tax your body, tax your mind, and tax your emotional well-being, and that's what we talk about how it relates to stress in terms of its connection to compassion fatigue. So the demands are outweighing the resources, and the resources being your coping abilities. So what we talk about here, and the way I really like to focus in on this, is the interpretation or the perception of the stressors. What may be a stressor to you may not be a stressor to somebody else, because it's all about how you interpret that, how you classify that stressor, and how you talk about it within your own mind. Self-talk is a big key here, and what you say to yourself in regards to these things. If somebody pulls in front of you on the highway going 100 miles an hour, one person's first inclination may be to, have that initial fight or flight response, and that stress response kicks in, and they have an immediate emotional reaction, which usually follows with some physical action of hand gestures. However, somebody else who's changed the way that they think or they perceive that stressor may not have that stress response fire, which ultimately is better for that person. They may look at it and go, you know what, maybe they're on their way to the hospital, maybe there's an emergency, maybe there's something else going on. Is that the case? We don't know. It doesn't matter. But the bottom line is that we change the way we perceive these stressors so they don't trigger stress response in us, because the only person that's hurting is us. So what's the 411 on stress? And I like to talk about the physical aspects of stress quite a bit because a lot of people just forget about these things. But it's really important that I bring this up, and I really like to educate folks on what we're talking about in terms of the physiological system in the body and the sympathetic nervous system. So stress is the fight or flight system. We all know it. We've all learned about it in school. But the same system that turns on in the body when there's an actual physical threat, like a bear running into the room, is the same system that fires due to a perceived threat. Whether it's a difficult client or something going on personally at home, maybe your own financial issues or things like that, your kids, in-laws, all of these are stressors. But the same response that occurs in the body due to an actual threat like a bear is the same response in the body due to a perceived threat. The difference is this: when the bear leaves and you run, you flight, or you fight it, that stress response turns off and the relaxation response triggers on. The difference is when it turns on due to a perceived threat, it often stays lingering quite some time, and it doesn't just automatically shut down as quickly. So we have to trigger and initiate that relaxation response. Otherwise, you're activated, you stay activated, you're slowly coming down, and then something else happens 5 minutes later, and you shoot right back up again. And it's that compounding stress that really does take a toll on us at the end of the day. People wonder why they don't sleep at night. This is why. You try to go to bed at the end of the evening from working all day where you've had stressor after stressor after stressor, and that response is continuing to fire in your body, and then all of a sudden you try to lay down and turn your mind and body off so that you can go to sleep, and it's just not happening. So you have to initiate that response. You have to trigger that parasympathetic nervous system in terms of triggering that relaxation response so that you can allow yourself to get that sleep that you need. All right, so what are the effects of stress? And here's where a lot of bells and whistles might be going off, and you go, man, this sounds familiar. A lot of us have experienced it. I have experienced it. We all will continue to experience it. The goal here is to remember two things. One, be more aware of yourself. And two, work on trying to find ways to reduce the impact of stress and change your perception of stressors, and also be more cognizant of how to immediately shut it down. It's impossible to say that stress is not going to affect you in your life. I want stress to affect you in your life. It's a survival system. But I want you to learn how to be better in control of that response, and that's what's key. So what are some of the effects of stress? We have physical, mental, and behavioral. These are the three big key areas that I focus in on. But physical, increased heart rate, blood pressure goes up, respiration becomes rapid and shallow, you've got adrenaline flowing, muscle tension. I often work with a lot of folks, and I walk around their cubes at the end of the day if I go and do observation at their offices, and I always see people grabbing their shoulders. They're tensing, grabbing their muscles are tensing up in their shoulders. That's muscle tension. That's due to stress. I talk here about rapid heart rate. You feel those things. Sometimes you get flushed just before a big meeting or something, or you know you're going to have a difficult client, and you get real red, and you feel that heat get up into your face and into your ears. That's a change in your blood pressure. That fight or flight system is firing in your body. You are preparing to fight or flight. For what? You're sitting at your desk, maybe dealing with a difficult client, but it's not a physical, actual threat, but the same system in your body is firing. So you have to manage your response to those stressors in order for you to be able to do your job effectively, and also for you to be okay when you leave at the end of the day and go home at night. Mental, like I talked about before, some of those things: confusion, loss of concentration, inability to focus. Your decision-making ability is altered. Memory is significantly impacted due to increased stress. And also behavioral. And these are all things that people assume are just habits, rapid talking, foot tapping and things like that. What often happens with habits is habits come from times of increased periods of stress. And so you have some habitual response, like tapping your foot, twirling your hair, biting your fingers, biting your nails. That usually is associated with something that has happened, that was your go-to physiological or behavioral type activity from a stressor, and over time it's become habitual, so you just automatically go to it. But those are some other changes that are associated with it. So what are we talking about here with chronic stress? Chronic stress is key, and this is where I want to be very adamant in relaying to folks to just be more aware of yourself and learning these things. And it's not, everything is easier said than done, but it's a matter of making that commitment to start making these changes, because chronic stress is the danger. It relates to chronic illness, issues with the GI tract, irritable bowel disease, soft tissue injuries. If you have bad backs, it usually is a huge contributor to increased tension in the back and muscle spasms, cardiovascular system compromise, and also immune system dysfunction. If you go to college campuses around midterms and finals and you take a walk into their student health centers, the increase in traffic is significant during that time of the year. These kids don't study, they wait till the last minute, they're up at all hours of the night studying, and their immune systems are compromised, therefore they get sick and they spread it like wildfire. Same thing happens to you when you're under chronic stress for an extended period of time. The body's ability to fight off infection and to heal and recover is compromised up to 9 times. Okay? It also leads to prolonged frustration, anger, hostility. But all of these things over time, without shutting that stress response down, and remember I said it's that little firing throughout the day and not shutting it down, is over a period of time going to increase the likelihood and increase your susceptibility to experiencing secondary trauma and compassion fatigue. So my answer to it all, and this is one of many things that will help, but I like to call this the control of 3. This is what a lot of folks have a very hard time listening to and really capturing it and letting it sink in. So I'm going to say it and I'm going to let it sink in for a moment. But you have no control over anything or anybody, period. You don't. That includes your children, your spouses, your clients, everybody else. You have no control over any of those things. You have no control over life events. At the end of the day, you have control over 3 things in this entire world, and this is it. What you think, what you say, and what you do. So the minute you really absorb that and sit on it and think about it, sleep on it tonight, I want you to just keep saying it to yourself. I wrote this on my office wall so my Wounded Warriors can come in, because I teach them to say this to themselves all the time. You know, they would say, this person stressed me out, or this person angered me, or this person caused a PTSD flare-up in me. And I says, wait a second. You don't have control over that person, but you do have control over how you respond to that person and how you respond to that person's behavior or that situation or that life event. They experienced significant things through combat and stuff, and they had no control over those things. But now they have control over how they respond to those situations. So I say this with you know, a lot of in-depth, you know, feel behind it. I want you to remind yourself every day of the 3, what you think, what you say, and what you do. So talking a little bit more about these things and how we can implement them into our daily lives. It all starts with how and what you think. So like I said earlier about the driver cutting you off, how do you think about that? You can either think, oh my gosh, what a jerk, I can't believe you just did that, my fight or flight response fires, and that's no good for me. Or I can say, you know what, he's probably in a rush, he's going to the emergency room, maybe there's a sick kid in the car, we don't know. It doesn't matter. Whether it's true or false, it doesn't matter. We need to say whatever we need to say to ourselves so that we have a better reaction. So we need to work on changing the interpretation and perception of stressors. There are just going to be those situations that trigger that stress response. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it doesn't happen to me, because that would be a lie. We are all susceptible to that. But you can take a look at yourself and just evaluate some of the things in your life that you know tend to cause you stress, and look at them and say, well, what am I really letting cause me stress? And it doesn't necessarily have to be only things that occur in the workplace. It's also personal things that are going on at home, because although we try our hardest to say we're going to leave at home what needs to be left there and only come to the office fresh and ready to go, and we're going to leave whatever happens in the office at the office and not take it home, that sometimes is just not realistic. So you've got to try to change the way you think about these things in order for them to not have such a significantly negative impact on you. You got to focus on what you can control and let the rest go, and remind yourself every day of the control of 3. And I do this on a regular basis, and I really suggest other people do as well. It does help. The next one is, excuse me, what you say. Be aware of your words, what you say out loud, what you say in your own mind. Self-talk is huge. A lot of folks don't realize this, but a negative thought or a negative internal chatter or self-talk in your head can and will trigger the stress response in your body. I use biofeedback extensively in my training. I'm board certified in biofeedback, and I've hooked my warriors up, and they don't believe this, but I hook them up. And I have them start thinking about different things, and I show them the screen so they can see what their bodies are doing in response to these thoughts. So whether they're verbal words or words that you say subconsciously or internally into your head, they are going to trigger that stress response. So just be aware of what you say to yourself. Communicate with your support system if necessary. If you don't have one, it's okay. Talk to yourself. And I say this to a lot of people, and they look at me a little strangely, and it is okay to have those conversations with yourself. Have one in the mirror if you want. It's probably better to have one in the privacy of your own home so people don't look at you oddly, but you know, it is okay to have those conversations with yourself and just kind of have those self-reflecting moments. It's important. We tell our clients and those that we work with to do some of these things, but we are the worst at taking our own advice. And a lot of people are probably shaking their head right now because we've all been susceptible to that. We've all done that. So you just got to remember to do these things for yourself. But communicate. Communicate to your support system. Communicate to coworkers. If you're having a hard time with something, just get it off your chest so that it doesn't stay with you and continue to keep that stress response firing. It's key. Lastly, what you do. Prepare, prepare, prepare. I talk about a pre-performance routine. I've worked with a lot of professional athletes, and they all understand a pre-performance routine to a T. I work with kickers, they use a routine. I work with golfers, they use a routine. I say this to other people like social workers, healthcare professionals, law enforcement. They go, what? What are you talking about? Before you have a client come in or somebody that you're working with, go through a routine for yourself, and it doesn't have to be long. It could be a minute that you're going to do these things so that you can help prepare yourself mentally, emotionally, and physiologically for the next case that's coming in. If that involves walking around the cubes once or going outside and taking 3 breaths of fresh air and then coming in and saying something in your own mind like a mantra to yourself, anything to get your attention focused, your body calm. The key thing is, and I'm going to say this again, get your body calm. If you are ready before you have a client come in and you think subconsciously real quick or in your own head, oh, I can't believe I have to do this, or this is going to be a difficult one, your stress response has already gone up and you're already firing. So then when they get in, it's just going to continue to go up and up and up and up. So you need to make sure that you put yourself at neutral, that you start at 0 before that person even walks in the door. Use that routine, use that minute or so, or 5, whatever you want, but most people don't have 5. But if you even had that minute, just take a moment, prepare, keep your mind focused, keep your attention at bay, keep your body calm. It's that last minute self-check that's key. All right? Schedule and engage in recovery time each and every day, even if it's for 5 minutes. People tell me all the time, I don't have 5 minutes. I say, yes, you do. Lock yourself in a bathroom and don't take your cell phone with you. That will give you your me time, and I call it me time. Be selfish. It's important. After each and every case, take a walk. Even if it's for a minute, take a walk. Take a breather. If my warriors couldn't find me after a case, I was hiding behind a brick wall behind of our building. It was the only way for me to be able to see 9 warriors in a day, and that's sometimes what was happening. And then that didn't count the, intermittent crisis that came to the door knocking throughout the day, needing something. So in order to sustain and maintain optimal performance throughout the day, you've got to take care of yourself. So what's your plan? Start at 0 before a session. This is what I talked about before. Do a quick self-check. Is my mind clear? Is my body calm? Am I ready to go? Okay, that's key. Have cues or periodic check-ins for your internal monitor, your heart rate and your respiration. Every hour or so, sit at your desk and just do some regulated deep breathing. 4 or 5 seconds in through your nose, nice and slow, bring it all the way in, and then slow and control on the exhale all the way out. Do that once or twice, and you will feel the world of difference because that immediately triggers that relaxation response. Next point, and I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to hone in on this. Decompress after every session no matter what. Whether it's a 2-minute walk or a 5-minute walk, breathe, get away from your desk, shut down, reboot, just like you would do a computer. When we have a computer that's acting up on us and we've got multiple programs running and all of a sudden the whole thing freezes, sometimes we have to hit the power button, hold it down, and let it shut off and do a manual override before we turn it back on about 10 seconds later. Do this to yourself. If you take away nothing else from today, do that for yourself. It is the only way that you can sustain in a better way, in a more optimal way, long term. Otherwise, you're just going to keep on going the same route, and it's going to keep building up and keep building up. So treat yourself like a computer and reboot and start over. And then also daily scheduled me time is important. Put it in your calendars, put it in your cell phones as your calendar reminders so that you know to do those things and check in with yourself. So, like I said earlier, breathing is a key element of what I teach. It's the best tool that we have to trigger the relaxation response. All you have to do is stop and do it. And I say stop and do it. Yes, we breathe all the time. That's how we live. But you don't realize how often you hold your breath for things. Next time you're out with somebody and you ask them a question and they have to sit there and think about it, watch their breathing and see what happens. They're probably holding their breath. Most people do when they stop to think about a response. Any of those different things. Next time you're watching an intense show on TV, take a moment and just kind of do a check-in and see if you're holding your breath. Are you clenching your fists? Oftentimes that goes with it. Well, when you hold your breath, that signals the brain to be hypervigilant, which means we go into fight or flight response. So take a moment periodically throughout the day and breathe. Slow in through the nose, hold it up at the top, slow and controlled out through the mouth, exhale. It is the simplest, easiest thing to do, but the thing that we do the least of, and it really makes a tremendous difference. My last point here is that everyone's rate is different. So you hear quite often people say 5 in, 5 out. That's different for everybody. I'm 4 in and about 11 out because I hold a lot of hot air in. So your exhale might be a little bit longer. It doesn't matter. It's just full in through the nose, slow and controlled, full out through the mouth, slow and controlled. Whatever that rate is for you that works, just do it. But just do that a couple times periodically throughout the day, every hour on the hour, or before you get in the car, or before every session that you have with a client, or anything like that, and just regularly pinpoint yourself to do those things, and it will start making a significant difference for you. So I talked earlier about the scales. Stress is busted. How do we do this? We want to be sure not to tip the scales. So you do have those resources. You just need to implement them. Most of you all have extensive education and training. Like I said earlier, you all know a lot of these things, but we don't practice what we preach. And I'm saying we because I've been right there with you and I've done these things. So I might be sitting here leading the webinar, but I have experienced some of these difficult times, and I've had to be reminded of some of these things. So that's just all this is, and that's why I'm here, to just kind of help reinforce some of these facts and provide these quick tips and these tools, and just help lead you all to being more self-aware and kind of give it some thought. How can I self-regulate more often? How do I be more aware of what I need and what's going on in a given moment so that I can better serve my clients and take care of them? So talking about using your resources, and the big thing, like I said, ultimately is the self-awareness and self-regulation. You see the difference between this picture and the scale earlier. It's the same amount of demands. You got a lot of rocks there. You only have a little bit of resources, but there is more of a balance because you're implementing those resources and you're using those resources. So it's not realistic to say these stressors are not going to be existent anymore. Okay, like I said before, you can't control these things. You can't control what goes on around you in your professional career. You can't control what goes on around you pretty much ever in your personal career, or in your personal life. So you've got to learn how to better manage those demands and those stressors, and that's where implementing these resources are key. Using things like improved self-talk, taking breaks, pre-performance routines, breathing and self-regulating, having that scheduled me time is key. Don't eat at your desk. Get up and go have a meal. You know, I know that's hard to do, but even if it's outside for 5 minutes, it will completely change the dynamic of you and physiologically speaking, change what your body's doing. Get up and move. Stretching is another thing. Take 5 minutes and stretch. If there's a place in your office that you can hide out and stretch, great. If not, stretch in front of everybody. They'll ask you what you're doing, and you say, I'm doing stress management training. But it really is a powerful tool and helps release serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone in the body. So it's these little things. Last thing I want to add here is also water. Everybody says drink water all the time. Yeah, it's important to drink water, but the reason I'm saying it is stress actually dehydrates the body, and then that causes other problems. So drinking water, keeping yourself hydrated throughout the day is important as well. So I use this picture, I share this picture all the time, and I talk about this all the time, and I want everyone to think about this and think about how it relates to yourself. At the end of the day, it is all about you. You cannot take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. So for everyone that was on an airplane recently, think about when they go through the safety brief at the beginning, and they say, in case of an emergency, put the mask on yourself before putting it on the person you are traveling with. Why? Because if you go unconscious, you can't render assistance or aid to anybody else, so what good are you? And that is it. So you've got to take a moment and take that mask and put it on yourself so that you can better serve the people that you're working with and take care of everybody else around you. And oftentimes, it doesn't end with being at work. You got to go home, and there's a lot more people at home depending on you and needing you. So you've got to remember to do this, not just in your work life, but also in your personal life. It's that balance that is key and critical so that you can sustain for an ongoing period of time and prevent compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. All right? It's all about you. So briefly, we finished up a few minutes early today because I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions that may relate to this. And I posed a few questions here for everybody. What are some of your challenges? What are your coping mechanisms? Do you do a self-check? So this is just to kind of get your minds going and thinking if you have any questions that relate to what we talked about today. Feel free to put them into the question box, and we can go over some of those. We've got some time to cover that.
So do we have any questions in the queue, Patrick?
Okay, I see here that some folks are using self-talk, which I'm very happy to see. That is definitely a big one, and I encourage everybody to use it. Also, just keep in mind that we have up to 20,000 thoughts a day that run through our brains, and that's quite a big number. A good chunk of that number are subconscious thoughts. So just when I say self-aware of your body, I also refer to being more self-aware of your mind and being more aware of some of those thoughts that go into your mind. All right. So here I was asked, can I provide the definition of compassion fatigue? And the definition of compassion fatigue does go synonymously with secondary trauma in terms of the signs and symptoms of PTSD are present and caused by indirect exposure. So it's just a cumulative buildup of those symptoms and what they can do over the course of time due to just relating to some of these folks. And where Robin talked earlier about the sympathy and the empathy, I want to take a moment to kind of bridge that in here. It's not necessarily the sympathy, but it is the empathy, feeling for others. A lot of people will say, I understand where you feel. You don't necessarily have to walk in somebody's shoes, but it is that buildup over time that can occur.
Okay, Lisa, I see another question here, so let me read this question to you.
Okay.
How can organizations like employers help reduce secondary trauma among their employees? Is there anything organizations themselves can do?
Actually, that's a really good question. I would say that a lot of organizations should promote self-care and self-regulation. Sometimes it's a very difficult line to walk because the pressure is on to meet the demand of the high numbers that you have walking in your office. So a lot of the times it's just there's not enough time. But I think if employers encourage their people to take these little steps throughout the day to do these things, they're going to get more out of them over the course of time and have a healthier and happier workforce, and ultimately be able to provide better services to the clients that they serve and that they're meeting with. So just encouraging and fostering that self-care environment, allowing for these mini breaks, after each session and assisting with kind of having a backup buddy system to help if there's something else going on.
So here's another question. You talked about the before the session and after the session, but caseworkers are often hearing gut-wrenching stories from their clients, and it can be hard to keep your emotions in check. Are there any strategies you can recommend for folks to remain professional while at the same time being empathic towards their client situation?
This is a great question. This is something that I will share with you all, and it's something I've had to learn. Working with my wounded warriors over time, I never ask them about what happened to them in combat. That's not what I do. I'm not clinical based. But working with them over the course of the year of their program, they confide in me and they trust me and they do share a lot. And there are some things that they share that are extremely graphic and detailed, but they need to unload it. One of the things I've always said to myself was if they had to live it and deal with it, I can hear about it. So I guess it's, you know, you have to try to change your perception of things and maybe alter the way you think about it and kind of put a spin on it in that way and what you say to yourself and kind of pre-program your mind. The other thing is if I'm in the middle of a session and somebody's sharing something very intense with me and it triggers an emotional response out of them, sometimes I have to catch myself and I take a couple really deep breaths, and I've just practiced doing that to where somebody can't see me doing it. But it does happen, and we are human. So if it does happen, don't beat yourself up about it. You know, just handle it as it comes. But just be more aware of yourself in terms of how you go into that situation and what you can say to yourself.
So I see in our questions from our viewers today, one mentions dealing with the shock of a client who recently lost a baby and how difficult that was. And another mentions the interest in a concrete example of how to express empathy. Could you perhaps take that scenario of a client who's recently lost a baby and offer an empathic response?
Well, the one thing that I have to say that you should always just be cautious of is I understand how you feel if you've never been there. And that's something across the board. And it's hard, and you don't mean it in terms of in any negative way. You're just trying to be empathetic, but unless you have actually lost a baby, you don't know how it feels. That's something I had to catch myself with quite a bit working with my warriors, because I can't say I understand how you felt. I've never put boots on and I've never been in theater, so I cannot say that. But you can empathize with them and saying, I can't imagine how this must make you feel. I can't imagine the impact that it has on you. I'm here for you. You know, communicate with me. I'm going to be here with you throughout this process to help you try to navigate this and you know, that kind of thing. But just staying in the moment and not trying to put your own spin on it and keep away from doing that and just prevent that. I think that's the best advice I can give on that.
I would also add, I had a situation once where I was talking with a mom who had lost a son to violence. And she was talking specifically about how the sibling was really struggling with the loss of their brother, and that she really wanted to get some services for the sibling, wanted to get him in counseling. And as I was talking to her, I asked her if she had received any services, and she had not been in counseling either. So I think this is another good opportunity when you hear a situation like this to ask if they have received any services, or would they appreciate a referral where they might could talk to someone who could give an objective perspective.
All right. Real briefly, somebody had asked, did I say can or can't imagine? I said can't. I can't imagine, I cannot imagine going through that if I've never experienced that. There's also another question here. How do you deal with a client who discloses suicidal thoughts? This is a very tricky one. I don't know what type of training you all go through. I've been through a number of suicide prevention trainings, and also I'm ASSIST certified, which helps with this. You have to ask them some of these difficult questions right there, because you don't want to let them leave if they're disclosing some of these things, and so you have to come right out and ask them these things, but do it in a very careful way. You know, coming out, you know, have you made a plan? Have you thought, you know, have you really thought about doing this, and have you made a plan about it? They will disclose these things oftentimes. If they're bringing them up to you, they're asking for help. If they're talking about suicidal thoughts, they are asking for help. I've had this happen countless times over the years with working with some of my warriors. Oftentimes they express these things to me, and they told me, I've never told anybody else, and I've never told my counselor this. So, you know, in that moment, you have to deal with each situation as it comes, and try to find where those links are to help kind of bring them back into the moment. What are you here for? Do they have children that depend on them and rely on them? It's also critical that you bring somebody else in who's qualified and trained to assist, to help you with them, and do an immediate referral for counseling or mental health care to ensure that there is no ongoing danger here with the potential threat of suicide. So you've got to take each case as it comes, but it's important. If you don't feel comfortable with any training that you've received in the past, I do suggest reaching out to some of these other organizations that do provide it. Like I said, before, we went through what's called Safe Talk, and then I also went through an Assist Train program where all of the folks that work with the Wounded Warriors are put through that, and I think it was really helpful. I know there's a number of other ones like that. All right, I think that might be it. I hope I was able to get everybody's questions. And if there's other questions that people may think of after we complete this webinar, please feel free to send them out. They can get forwarded to me, and I will happily respond to them and assist you all with anything that I can and provide you additional tools or anything like that if I wasn't able to address them before.
And as mentioned earlier, we've offered some additional resources. The Healthy Marriage and the National Resource Center for Healthy Marriage and Families website has a large number of resources, research-based resources in their library, as well as the Virtual Training Center. And courses in the Virtual Training Center do provide a certificate of completion, which can be used for CEUs if that's helpful to anyone. And there is also a resource that I think you should check out. Social service providers have families too, which touch on these topics of self-care and the importance of focusing on your own healthy relationships.
Right.
Here are the resources. Christina?
Yeah, it's me. I can
take it away.
All right. Well, I want to take a moment to thank Lisa and Robin for their fabulous presentation. And also thank everyone who took the time to join us today. I hope you found the information relevant and useful. As a quick plug, if you have any OCAT-related questions, as Lisa indicated, and this always happens to us after you finish a webinar, you're like, oh, I wish I asked that question. You can, or any additional questions either from this webinar or tool questions or something else related to your OCAT work, please use the OCAT Learning Center to post your questions or submit a request for assistance. If someone can move the slide, I can give you, it's right there in front of you. And finally, take a moment for this very brief evaluation that will provide us with some feedback on your thoughts and reflection from today. And with that, thank you everyone and have a great rest of your day.